Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, and good morning. And when I say good morning, it actually is morning here. Our service is being live streamed today, which means some or many of you are also experiencing this frosty December morning, just as I am. It is good to see you, and to know that you have taken time this morning to be here to help us co-create this worship. Whether you are with me right now at 11:32 a.m. Eastern Time, or you are in some other time zone, or even watching this on some other day completely, remember, you are in the company of those who wish you well. One of the ways we mark our gathering is by lighting a chalice. And this reminds us of how we are connected to Unitarian Universalists around the world who are lighting chalices at the beginning of their services. One of my favorite images is imagining churches from the East Coast to the West on a Sunday, just lighting a chalice one after another throughout that day. But the chalice also reminds us to bring our best selves into this moment, especially today as we think about questions and responses. I invite us to bring our best selves into this space, to engage deep and thoughtful and caring ways, not only of asking questions, but also of listening and receiving and reflecting on the responses. So let us light the chalice in that spirit. If you have one at home, you could get that ready, or if you have a candle you'd like to light along with me. And if you would, say the words of our chalice lighting together. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. This congregation has been a presence in the community for over 150 years. And one of the ways this congregation has remained vital, has grown and evolved over time, is in its free and responsible search for truth and meaning. That's our fourth principle. And that search invariably involves wondering, observing, reflecting, and questioning. And one of the reasons questioning is so much a part of us is because we are not bound together by a single creed, not by one thing, one text that is dictated to us that says we must believe this in order to be in community. But no, we are bound together by promises that create the space for us to be in relationship with one another. And that covenantal relationship is what allows us to ask and wonder and listen and grow. It gives us time to live into the questions of who we are individually and collectively. So whether this is your first time here or if you have been part of this congregation for many, many years, I invite you into this way of being with each other. If you would say the words of the covenant with me. The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth in love, and to help one another. So welcome to each and all. It matters that you are here. We are gathered for worship.
For Christians, our Christian friends, begins the season of Advent, the time between seeking and what is found, the space between the notes of the melody of history. In this space of waiting, honoring stillness and darkness, I invite you into a chant, one that we'll sing together several times throughout the month. The chant is called Be Still and Know. I invite you into a space in your body where you can sing and receive music, receive singing well, into a space where you can invite your voice to be present with you. I'll teach the melody, and then I'll invite you to sing along. And we'll do it several times in the spirit of meditative practice. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Will you try it with me? Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Now we'll sing quite a few times as a mantra, as a way of allowing a drone, a melody, a chant to take us into the center of ourselves, where our instincts and our connection to spirit are most closely hooked up. I invite you into that space of quiet within yourself. Let's sing together. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and night are one holy circle. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. And one final time. Be still and know that day and night. Be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. May we ever be connected, then, to the growing circle of life. Amen.
Good morning, one and all. I'm the Reverend Manish Mishra-Marzetti, serving our community as senior minister. We're delighted you're together. We're all together as a community this morning, live streaming to you. We are engaged this morning in our question box service format, which is both similar and a little bit different than how we typically do this in person. So these question box, for those who are not familiar with it, it's an opportunity for members and friends of our community to submit spiritual wonderings, questions they're holding. Occasionally there's getting acquainted questions in there too, both from kids and teens as well as from adults. And I don't see any of these questions in advance, so there are no pre-scripted responses or answers. There's a whole lot of trust on my part as we approach all of this periodically together, and it always goes well. So let me just share with you a little bit of what's a little different this time around. Usually on a Sunday morning in person in our sanctuary in Ann Arbor, we invite attendees to submit the questions right then and there, and they're literally just passed up to the front. This time, given our virtual format, the questions were submitted in advance. They have found their way to Reverend Theresa, who will randomly pull them out of boxes. There's one box for the questions from kids and teens and another box for the questions from adults. I always say that anything within appropriate professional boundaries is fine. And if there's anything among the questions that feels like might be pushing that very fair and appropriate limit, I'll say as much, but it's never happened. So more so a reminder. And let me say, oh yes, with our questions, we always invite people to submit their names so that if there's anything in there that is helpful for follow-up, we can follow up with folks. We don't do anything anonymous in community, and sometimes as well, in addition, it is helpful to be able to follow up with folks on things they're wondering about. There's never time to cover all of the questions that get submitted. Today will be no different, but please know that we will read everything that was submitted. I always do. And it factors into the thinking and planning for future topics that we might visit on Sundays. Typically, we do something like three or so questions from the kids and somewhere between 3 and 5 questions from the adults. So with that framing, I'm going to invite my colleague, Reverend Theresa, to help us shift into the time of responding to questions that the kids and or teens may have submitted.
Okay, so this is the box of questions from children and youth. And here we go. This is from one of the children. How do you do your hair in the morning?
Well, okay. Probably not. Well, actually, I was about to say not dissimilar from you. And then I have to say perhaps, because there are lots of different textures, qualities, styles of hair, and all of them require different care. So with my hair, being Asian American, my hair is darker and straight, and I will go into a shower. After coming out of the shower, my hair is wet, and then I typically use hair gel to help shape my hair the way I like it. That's a curious question. I almost wonder why the child was wondering that. The kid was wondering that. But anyway, and I would be curious to ask you, how do you do your hair? But we'll carry on. Theresa, how about a next one?
Okay. This is from one of the youth. When did you get your job?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question because there's many ways to answer that. I've had many jobs. So if it's a teen, I wonder if you're wondering about my first job ever. I was a substitute newspaper delivery kid when I was little. And it was a neighbor, a boy across the street, had a paper route, and when he would go on vacation, I would substitute and fill in and deliver his papers for him. I was really not good at it. I would sometimes miss houses that were supposed to receive newspapers, and they would always promptly call the paper company. And my poor friend across the street who was on vacation would get into trouble, and he would dock my pay for missing the houses that I would make very little money at the end of it. So I guess that might be one of the first jobs, although that was very part-time. Another part-timer job after that, when I was in college, my undergrad years, I would seasonally help out in a florist shop. That was actually really fun, being surrounded by flowers. There too, I think I made mistakes. The first time around, I did a perfect job, and I think one of the subsequent times I made some mistakes. And it's a costly mistake in the florist business if you get things wrong, because they have to comp the customer an entire bouquet. I think I must have a poor track record from my younger years, because I'm only remembering the jobs that I've screwed up. Young adult years, I was a diplomat, and then I've been in the ministry for 15 to 20 years, thereabouts. So yeah, it depends what type of job you're talking about. But here in Ann Arbor, I've been here with this job with us in our community 2.5 years.
So ready for another?
Sure.
Here we go. Okay. This one has a little bit more text to it, so listen carefully. Climate change is going to destroy all human life unless we do something very drastic and soon. Do you think it's more important to do something to protect that life, or let it take its course to destroy what is destroying us, as we are the ones creating the problem?
Wow, that's fascinating. So this is clearly from an either older elementary or teen. I would say it's probably from a teen. Thank you for that question. So, I would probably have a slightly different interpretation. I think there's, on the trajectory that we as a human species are now, our best science would indicate that we are indeed on a trajectory of very, very significant devastation to our species, to the human species. Now, you framed your question in terms of extinction, like it might do us in altogether. I don't know that I've arrived at that conclusion. I have arrived at the conclusion that there could be devastating and very, very large scale loss of life with the trajectory that we're on. Okay, so so you're asking, should we just let it happen because maybe we kind of deserve it and maybe the planet will self-correct on the other side of that? I mean, if you look at the way we're behaving as a species collectively, so I'm not talking about any one of us or even any one country, but collectively, okay? We're not really effectively addressing the problem that we have collectively created. There's political reasons for that. There's economic greed and self-interested reasons that are related to all of that. The systems that we are living in the midst of, political and economic, are designed to promote self-interest and not collective species-level interest, generally speaking. So the scenario that the second scenario you have there around there may be this inevitable destruction. Is it unavoidable, or maybe even is it good? That's certainly somewhat of the path that we're on. Now, do I want that for us? Do any of us want that? I hope not. And even as I say that, would any of us want that? We live in a time where we don't have agreement as a species around the nature of the problem. So I've also I've stated things saying like the best of our science points towards certain things. There are many people who just, their opinion is different than what the science points toward. I don't know how we work with that, how we correct that, how we help people with that, even if it's possible to help people who disagree with the best science that we have access to. We see that disagreement with science not just in the field of climate change, we see it in the field of epidemiology and virology, as well as we're trying to work collectively in addressing the issues around the coronavirus. So there are some fundamental issues that we as a species are grappling with. I think I've arrived at now 3. The political systems being self-interested, the economic systems being self-interested, and now this opinion-driven disagreement with scientific evidence. Yeah, I've wondered a little bit of many of the things that are in your question as well. If we can't, as a species, if we can't figure these things out, if we can't figure out how to commit ourselves collectively, not one nation even, but all of us, to ultimate higher goods, things that benefit all of us, all human beings on this planet, maybe that inevitable trajectory, I don't know, I don't want to say we deserve it. Nobody deserves suffering. Now, so you also asked, would things be better on the other side of that, potentially? So when the economic activity really significantly slowed down because of coronavirus-related closures, we saw the environment rebound in ways that I think nobody was really focused on. We weren't trying to predict what positive outcomes might come from closing economies globally, and yet we saw environmental benefits. So on one hand, there's a part of me that wants to say, look, it's possible. Helping improve our relationship with the environment and the planet is possible. We just took some actions. They were temporary in nature. There was a cost for taking those actions, but they led to positive benefits within short amounts of time. That's the thing that was very interesting to me, that it is possible for us to adjust our relationship to economic activity, to how we're living, and apparently see very significant benefits within shorter amounts of time. Now, what did that generate? That also generated tremendous economic uncertainty, a lot of fear and anxiety around livelihood and well-being. So this is super complex, these needs of our time. I think what I'll say, so your first option was that we should try and work on this. I'm firmly, unequivocally in that camp. And what we're up against in trying to work on it is really shifting political, economic systems that were not designed to think of species-level collective good, to start to focus on that. And we have to do that country by country, and all kinds of different countries that have similar economic and political systems that are self-interest driven. And yet we have done things like this before. So when I was growing up, there were problems with the ozone layer. And we undertook international action, concerted at a species level. We all decided this is for our collective well-being and good. And we were able to work on that together. So we have precedent for being able to undertake difficult actions, almost contrary to some of the assumptions and the structures that we are all a part of, to benefit all. I hope we can do that. I certainly am committed to that, and I want us as a human species to be able to do that. And I want to encourage you. We can't control what happens in the future, but we can control our own individual actions. We can control our community. That includes our Ann Arbor Unitarian Universalist community, includes our town of Ann Arbor, includes our state of Michigan. We can focus on the local level to make as many changes as we can that benefit all of us, and we should be doing that. We should be doing that. The future is not written, it's an open book. There are trajectories, and we have the ability to change those trajectories. That was a really good question, very thoughtful. I want to thank you, whoever submitted that. Thank you for that. Before we continue with the questions submitted by adults, I want to invite us into a brief pastoral moment. This has been it's been a hard week, at least for me, and maybe for some of you. The news of 3,000 deaths per day, the equivalent of what many of us experienced on September 11th. I wish I was the type of human being that could just kind of roll over my shoulders and not affect me, but I'm not. I'm a deeply feeling person, and that level of death in our country affects me very deeply. It's a week in which we've been hearing and learning. The staff team and I have been in deep reflection around recent reporting that, I spoke last Sunday about an epidemic of loneliness that pre-existed the pandemic in our country. We're now seeing reporting, the actual analysis coming out of the field of mental health. Rates of depression, rates of suicide are on an exponential curve compared to what might be more typical in other points of time in our nation's life. Things are rough for many of us, not all of us. Some of us are moving through day-to-day life as best as we can, and many of us are experiencing the ebb and flow of some days being really tough and other days being okay, and sometimes even in the same day, moving and shifting between those energies and those ways of being. I want to take a moment to just honor that and hold that. I know that has been my reality. It's also a week in which I've lost another personal friend, another Unitarian Universalist leader, the Reverend Hope Johnson. Some of you may have met Reverend Hope. She was with us for the installation ceremony that we engaged in about a year and a half ago. Reverend Hope died about a week ago. So I've been holding her and her ministry within Unitarian Universalism in my heart. Taking all of that collectively, I wanted to invite you into a reading. This is by the Reverend Theresa Soto, who serves as senior minister at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Oakland. This is from a book entitled Spilling the Light. It's related to our relationship to worry and anxiety and fear. And these words spoke to me this week, and I'd like to share them with you. From Reverend Theresa Soto. Worrying is like an elephant. The more someone tells you not to elephant, the more it becomes real and wrinkly, tooth and trunk. And anyway, did you even say you wanted an elephant taking up the whole entire living room? You never do when you're anxious, but anxiety didn't ask, is content instead to put muddy boots on your velvet mental furniture, laughing unconcerned when you actually care. Anxiety is like a song that gets stuck in your head, except the tune is off and the words keep getting messed up, but you still can't get rid of it. The fear, the stress, the skin-crawling dread. Blessed are the anxious. Sorry that it's hard. And you're not always wrong, that things sometimes fall apart and end up worse than when we started. Blessed are you when you try, fear gripping your arms as though it is afraid of losing you, even though what you know is that it's never far away. There is so much unseen labor in managing everything just under the surface. Blessed are you, the tired ones, the ones who bring along their elephants and still make room for what may be possible, for joy, for love, and for a future that may, even though we can't be sure of it, be even more abundant and full of every possibility of peace. May it be so. I want to mention as well, as we continue moving through this pandemic time, the staff team is working on making available pandemic-related support groups. And I want to encourage you, if you've been feeling some of the difficulty, some of the isolation, anxiety of this time, please keep an eye and an ear out for information about these pandemic era related support groups. They'll be run personally by Reverend Theresa Rohlck, our very own Reverend Theresa. And we encourage you, please consider participating. None of us should be holding the anxiety, the fear, the isolation completely by ourselves. And we're going to seek to make support available for those who desire it. With that, we'll return to Reverend Theresa and enter into some reflection around the questions submitted by adults.
And so here is the other box with questions from adults. I'll pick one out. Okay. We have no creed or shared theology, but that necessarily doesn't mean that people feel equally comfortable or welcome sharing their beliefs on religious, spiritual issues, especially if they may feel that theirs are in the minority, either a theist or humanist, for instance, in a congregation where most have a different outlook. Do we as a faith community do as much as we could to welcome a variety of perspectives?
That's a beautiful question. I want to thank the individual who submitted it. So there's one thing I would challenge in that question. The naming of one particular perspective or approach to spirituality as an example of being a minority. So a minority perspective within Unitarian Universalism or within our community. Some of you know that I've been in Unitarian Universalist leadership for decades, for a very, very long time. And among the things I've done in that many years of leadership, I served on an organization, a committee called the Unitarian Universalist Commission on Appraisal. This is kind of our denominational think tank. It's a nationally elected position. And being a denominational think tank, this group is always undertaking kind of both academic and academic, relational, and community-based studies on what the needs of our denomination and our movement are, kind of at the forward-leaning edge of it. And I want to say this was maybe about 10 years ago now. The Commission on Appraisal took up a study on theological diversity in our movement and published a report entitled Engaging Our Theological Diversity. I was on the Commission on Appraisal at the time that study was being undertaken. And one of the unambiguous findings of that national study was that literally, it doesn't matter where you place yourself on the theological, spiritual, ethical spectrum of everything that falls under Unitarian Universalism, every blessed last group, every blessed last point on that spectrum, save one, only one, did not fall into this. Every possibility felt that they were a minority, and not just a minority viewpoint or experience, but also an unseen minority perspective or viewpoint vis-a-vis everything else that existed in Unitarian Universalism. And the one exception to that were Unitarian Universalists who either have a Buddhist practice or identify as Unitarian Universalist, who lean on or draw on Buddhism. The Buddhists were quite content that they are in the center of Unitarian Universalism. Everybody else felt that they are somehow at the margins or marginalized or a minority perspective within Unitarian Universalism. So I'm sharing this by way of normalizing that unless you identify as Buddhist or a Buddhist practitioner within Unitarian Universalism, literally everyone feels the way your question just indicated. So I want to honor that, because it's not sufficient to honor it for only one or a couple of points on the wide variety of spiritual, ethical, theological diversity that exists within Unitarian Universalism. Now, why might everyone feel this way? or I'd say a vast majority of Unitarian Universalists feel that they are part of a minority perspective within Unitarian Universalism. Why might that be the case? There's a couple of things there. We are a people who relish in our self-identity as rebels. We view ourselves as folks who do not subscribe to majority approaches to spirituality, to theology, to a whole bunch of stuff, maybe even civic, politically, etc. We view ourselves as radicals and as rebels. And radicals and rebels, by definition, are always on the fringes. We enjoy that piece of self-identity. So if you're a radical and a rebel who is always on the fringe, you're never going to see yourself as fully in the center. Now, here's the other interesting thing. So some of you know that we have an organizational development student collaborating with our community this year. Her name is Reverend Amber Belland. And Reverend Amber has lifted up a very interesting question in the context of most Unitarian Universalists considering themselves to be at some minority position spiritually, ethically, philosophically, theologically, however we want to think of it. What is our sense of Unitarian Universalist culture and being committed to Unitarian Universalist identity and culture? Now, that is such a big question. I want to devote an entire service to that, and I'm planning on doing that. I'm not going to get into that today, but tune in January when we are planning on a service just related to that. If we are the people who are rebels and radicals and on the fringes of the things that we love and enjoy, what sense of mainstreamness are we willing to give ourselves to? That's the question. And I'm going to invite us to hold that rather than define that for us today. One possible answer is Unitarian Universalism, but then that begs the question, what is Unitarian Universalism? So hold that. I think that's an interesting exploration that we will return to. Back over to you, Reverend Theresa.
The next question. Okay. Would what I consider minor violations of the Ten Commandments, including A, taking God's or Jesus's name in vain, B, not honoring one's parents, or C, desiring but not actually acting to engage in adultery or theft, be considered morally wrong? So would what I consider minor violations of the Ten Commandments be considered morally wrong?
Okay, I'm trying to process this question as I'm hearing it. So the individual is saying there are things in the Ten Commandments that are considered wrong. The person who wrote this question thinks that their understanding or personal approach is that these are minor, I don't know what, mistakes, infractions, things that go awry in human relationship. I hear this as a question about human relationship and human behavior. Okay, let me speak to it that way, because I'm having difficulty trying to understand how to step into it. As a question that is about human behavior and how we understand something to be right, wrong, whatever, I would offer that, okay, so this is actually getting to the Unitarian Universalism. This will connect to the prior question. We are an ethically oriented religion, right? Okay, so that's kind of my personal take. Others can have a little bit of a different take, but if you read our 7 principles, they to me unambiguously read as kind of ethical statements. Now, ethical statements have to be embodied, right? Like they don't mean it. Ethics means nothing as an intellectual construct. Ethics has to be brought alive in our word, deed, action, embodiment, right? That's the only way ethics has any meaning. So if we are a people who are articulating how we are together and how we're companioning one another in life's journey in terms of ethics, then yeah, we have to care about how well we're doing it. Okay, so what is the test for how well we're doing it together? I would offer that the test of how well we're living into our ethics is communal harm, interpersonal harm, societal level harm, harm to the environment, harm to other living creatures or beings. That is one way of assessing. If you think of the legalistic framework of civil society, that's the same way much of the legalistic framework works. It's related to harm that has occurred in society or to others. So in a similar way, we have to care. Ethics implies that we need to care about our actions, words, deeds, behaviors, impact interrelationally, communally, societally, on our planet, and on other living beings. We have to care about all of that. So when you say there are things that you would consider a minor infraction, I'm going to pull out one example from this question. Adultery, okay? Well, let's say that implies that there's a committed relationship of some kind, and there's a relationship that occurs outside the context of the committed relationship. That's how I'm going to define it for the purposes of continuing to explore this example. Well, it depends what the ethical understandings of the relationship are, right? Like if the understandings where both people have come together and said, you are it for the rest of my life, I will have no other romantic or intimate / sexual partner for the rest of my life, and those are the ethical agreements in the marriage relationship, whatever it might be, and then there's behavior that occurs that doesn't respect all of those agreed upon understandings, then yeah, there's a problem, right? Harm has occurred. Now, one can keep that harm hidden, maybe for some time, temporarily. That might be adding harm on top of harm, potentially. So maybe that's not actually minor in that case, if harm is occurring. Now, one could imagine a relationship where there's a different set of understandings, where both people have said, maybe there's some degree of openness in the relationship. Maybe there's some degree, some set of understandings or rules of the relationship that allow other relationships to exist. That happens socially and societally. So, in that set of understandings, then there isn't necessarily harm because everything has occurred in a totally open way with open ethical understandings. There's no harm in that potential situation, right? So it's the same set of behavior. In one set of circumstances, it's in contravention of the ethical understandings the persons have arrived at. In the other, it's not. So this is why I was actually grappling with your question a bit. I was like, yeah, it could be minor, but maybe it's not minor. And maybe it's nothing at all. It really depends what, as I've gotten older in life, I've come to understand that it's all about, this is why we Unitarian Universalists use the word covenant, shared understandings. Developing shared understandings between people is a very significant part of what guides us together. And then continued reflection, are we still within those shared ethical understandings of how we're going to be together, or are we not? If we're not, has harm occurred, then we are beholden. It is part of our moral responsibility to try and repair harm, whether it's unintentional or intentional, because we care about people and because we care about community, we care about our impact. That was an excellent, actually, where it wound up was really excellent. I was a little confused by that question, but I'm very grateful now that it came up. That's a beautiful opportunity to explore human behavior, ethicality, covenant, a whole range of stuff. So, turn it back to Reverend Theresa.
Okay. The next question, another ethical question for you. Is it ethical to continue to reproduce?
Oh, wow.
Keeping in mind the environment and the possibility of many more natural disasters that will cause suffering, injustices in the world, children already here that don't have parents, etc. So in that context, is it ethical to continue to reproduce?
You've asked an amazing question. First I want to say I'm grateful that for whoever who wrote that you're thinking about these things. We should be thinking about these things. So I don't know that I have a precise answer for you. You're probably looking for a clear-cut answer, but I want to explore this question because it's a really good one, and I want to explore it a little bit. So yeah, there's tons of scientific reporting, research, I mean, unambiguous evidence. We human beings have overpopulated this planet. There's no confusion about this in the scientific community around population and demographic studies. As a species on planet Earth, we have grown at an exponential level with no plan as to how to manage that exponential growth of global population. Now, why? We have no mechanisms. So this is partly what I was alluding to, maybe, I think was this one of the children's questions. I was alluding to this, that, you know, in our nation state international structure, with nation states being driven by narrow self-interest defined by the state and the boundaries of the state and the people who live in it, being able to tackle global species level problems is really hard. How do you come up with any kind of global planning for a population of approaching 8 billion people? How we should have started that at maybe when we were 3 or 4 billion. And there was no such planning. There was no such possibility of such planning. I'm sure people thought of it, but we don't have the effective structures or mechanisms that could have actually brought that about. So the end result is we've already kind of reached a point where our species has overpopulated this planet, and we're seeing the pressures of that in a multitude of ways. You cited some of those in your question, and there's many, many more. I think one of the profound ways we're seeing this as well is human migration. People who are unable to find livelihood in whatever locality, region that they're living in are beginning to move around. They're wanting to find, which is what human beings, by the way, have also done from the beginning of time. We have moved around to follow resources when we're living in an era that can't support the population that lives there. So we are living into a time period where migration is being driven by overpopulation. The climate shifts are related to consumption patterns to support this immense human population on planet Earth. All right, now it's also probably too late to be doing population planning when we're already approaching 8 billion. Is it ethical or not ethical? That was kind of where you were kind of leaning or going. So let me point to the cultural social problem, which I think is also very huge. I mentioned that there's no global structure to do population planning. You know, what I like about this is, think of a farm, right? I'm going to circle right back to this next thing I was going to say. Think of a farm. A farmer would never double the population of goats or sheep that they're working with or triple it, quadruple it, without a plan for how they're going to care for all those sheep and goat, right? There's actually a plan. When you double, triple, quadruple populations, there's thoughtfulness that we bring to that at the micro level. No such thoughtfulness has occurred at the global level related to our own species. Again, like I said, no structures exist. But then, okay, add in the social, cultural, and the cultural is sometimes related to religious, spiritual elements as well. We continue to live in social, cultural, some degree of religious, spiritual assumptions that the pattern of human existence is one where we reach adulthood. It's expected culturally, socially, religiously, spiritually at times too, that we're going to couple up, and then after coupling up, there will be children, usually biological children, right? And it is such a strong cultural, social, religious, spiritual expectation that it's not examined. You know, I'd say the vast human population just does it. We just do the thing that's expected culturally, socially, religious, spiritually, without stopping to think that, wait, my God, we're approaching 8 billion on this planet already. And we're already struggling. We are already struggling with the impacts of that immense size of the human species population on planet Earth. What does that mean about these assumptions? So while we can see this theoretically as an intellectual exercise, think of what that might mean at the family level. Like, if you have children, let's say they're in their 20s or soon to be 20, would you want your children not to have biological children? That would mean you would not have biologically related grandchildren. So we can say we care about overpopulation, the climate-related impacts, the hunger-related impacts, the migration-related impacts, but then bring it home. This is about every human being, every member of our species on planet Earth. Are we also, in addition to not having a global structure to mediate and mitigate that, are we also willing to challenge our own implicit cultural, familial, social, religious, spiritual assumptions? Because that would mean a whole lot of stuff that is very personal. That would mean, having conversations at the family level about reproduction, about continuity of lineage. So it's profound, it's multi-layered, and it's complex. And for those reasons, I'm not going to give a cut and dry answer. I think this is the right thing, a right question, a very solid question to be reflecting on. And I'd encourage each of us to enter into that reflection as we see appropriate and fit. We probably have time for one more question, and then we're going to go.
Okay. And here we go, our final question. How to focus our energies to make change, locally and nationally, where most needed, when everything feels pressing and important?
Yeah. Yes. I want to affirm that feeling. So there's a feeling in that, right? And the feeling is, well, is anything I do going to make a difference? I mean, look at the last question we just talked about, the overpopulation of the human species on planet Earth. Does any one action going to impact that? The question from one of our youth around the trajectory, the climate devastation trajectory that our species is already on, like, is any one thing or one set of stuff going to make a difference? Okay, so here's what all of the wisest spiritual teachers I know have been saying, both consistently, but also especially during this time we're in. To give into the despair of the feeling, will any of it make a difference, is to not do anything, right? We might as well all become hedonists then. Like, whatever time is left, let's just fully enjoy it at the super micro level of me as one person. Let's just go out, enjoy it, like it's Prince's 1999. That's a song. I grew up in the 80s. Like, let's just party like it's 1999 or whatever the year we want to attach to that, and have a blast until it's all over. I can't live that way. And I wouldn't encourage any of us to live. So we said, right, we're people of ethics and morality. And that ethics and morality has a couple of imperatives of us. One, we're not going to give up. Don't give up. And we're not going to just turn into kind of in the moment hedonists because we feel we can't do anything else. That's not ethical living either. So what I would say is, do what you can, and that's different for each of us. It differs on ability, it differs on resources we have access to, it differs depending on our age. It differs in a lot of ways on a lot of vectors, but do what you can. And then one of the great spiritual wisdoms, this is definitely true in Hinduism, we don't attach ourselves to what the outcomes of being good people are. So we do the good thing because it is intrinsically good to do, not because it's going to lead to some concrete thing we can point to and later on say, hey, I deserve a ribbon or an award or a certificate because I did the good thing. No, there's no certificate for working on climate change. There's no certificate for caring about human suffering and the suffering of animals or our planet. There's no certificate. So, we do the right thing because it's intrinsically the right thing to do. We trust alongside that every little action is joined by other little actions that other people are doing. Collectively, those actions can make a collective difference. We have to trust in that our individual actions join up with the individual actions of others. I want to thank you all. These were lovely. Our community always submits thoughtful, provocative, deep questions. I really appreciate that. It is such a joy and a pleasure to be in a community that is so thoughtful. As I promised you, every question will be read. We reflect on them together deeply, and you'll probably not be surprised to see future topics and themes emerge in the months ahead based on some of the questions you've submitted.
I welcome you back into the space of singing, into the space between the questions and the answers, into the space between between the answer and when we decide whether or not the answer is satisfactory. In the question box service, not the answer box service, in the question box service, the space of minding, the space of being intimately connected with one another's thinking is the richest blessing of community we offer today. So let us be still in that moment and sing together. Be still and know that day and night, be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Be still and know that day and night, be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. And once more in this space. Be still and know that day and night, be still and know that dark and light are one holy circle. Amen.
One of the ways this congregation lives out its covenant to help each other is to share the collection one Sunday a month. And this month, we are sharing the collection with House by the Side of the Road, an amazing organization that provides clothing, bedding, and small household items to local families. From January to October in 2019, they served 2,700 families. 2,700. That's 270 families a month who needed assistance in their most basic needs. This year, like so many organizations, the pandemic has severely limited their fundraising opportunities, their face-to-face meeting with clients, and their volunteer hours. This year, in the same 10 months, they have only been able to reach half the number of families. And that is not because the need has decreased. Please know that your financial contribution of any size will make a difference in sustaining the work that they have done for the last 50 years. So please help House by the Side of the Road continue to serve local families. Go to UUAA.org/giving. And I thank you for your generosity. Next Sunday, we are presented with a wonderful opportunity to experience worship with one of our neighboring congregations, Fountain Street Church in Grand Rapids. They are welcoming us to join them for a service on the theme of love. And that service will premiere at 10 a.m. next Sunday morning. You can go to UUAA.org/service, which will bring you right to the doors of Fountain Street Church next week. Now, if your Sunday morning routine is such that 11:30 is the time you do worship, no worries. The service will be available on demand, and you can go to the same link, and that will lead you there at 11:30. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to welcome all of you to join the live Zoom social hour right after the service. If you're new to the congregation or to Unitarian Universalism, especially encourage you to come. Let the host know that you are new, and we will connect you with someone who is there specifically to welcome you and help answer your questions. That's UUAA.org/social hour. And as we've heard in this last hour of worship, there are many questions in our minds, many profound questions. And some of our profound questions are ones we don't have answers to, or ones that have multiple answers. But that shouldn't discourage us from asking or from continuing to search for answers. May you be okay with that. May you learn, as the poet Rilke wrote, to live the questions for now. Perhaps you will gradually, without noticing it, live your way into the answers, one distant stay in the future. So be well, my friends, and go now in peace. Amen.